I'm a big believer that if you want to have a spiritual experience, all you have to do is spend time in nature. You know, the Japanese have a practice known as Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing. They believe that if you spend time in nature around its atmosphere, the air, the electromagnetic energy, the trees, that it renews your spirit, it rejuvenates you. If you go into nature with an open heart and an open mind, and you ask for a sign, oftentimes it will communicate to you. You might see a branch or a leaf waving at you when there's no wind around. You'll be greeted by a fragrance, or a small animal will come up to you. And all these things have meaning. Nature is intelligent. It comes alive to us. You know, the word nature comes from the Latin natura, or the Greek physis. Recently, I was traveling in Egypt with Stephen Mailer, and we visited the Temple of Isis on the island of Philae in Aswan. And when we were there, he pointed out a great relief on the wall that showed that the power of the netters, or nature, comes from the cosmic, out in space.
Stars are always representing the cosmic. Nectar, of course, divine principle of creation. These has to do with energy and power. So basically it's saying the power, energy, and the netters comes from the cosmic.
John Muir said, "The clearest way into the universe is through a forest wilderness." So what do we get from that? Well, if you want to enter the universe, enter the forest wilderness. If we look at today's astrobiology, we see that what most likely is the forest on our planet is very similar to the forest in other solar systems. And then when we enter nature, there are hidden doorways all around us to other worlds. In fact, we now know through theories that are coming out, like the plasma electric universe theory and toroidal fields, that everything in fact is connected. And because everything has an electromagnetism to it, and we're all connected, we learn from the morphogenic field in Rupert Sheldrake's work that there's an electromagnetic field around the Earth that holds the building blocks and instructions for all life. Life can show up almost anywhere on our planet because it's universally encoded. Everywhere we visit in the world, we like to go for a hike and explore nature, whether it's in the majestic mountains, forests, and trees of our own backyard here in beautiful British Columbia, Canada, or the gorgeous landscape of Sedona, Arizona, where we recently hiked up in the early hours of the morning for a meditation inside an energy vortex to behold an incredible view of the red rocks, which words cannot truly do it justice. Even in South America and Central America, we've been into the jungles and seen that there are all sorts of beautiful landscapes waiting to be explored. John Muir once wrote, "How infinitely superior to our physical senses are those of the mind. The spiritual eyes see not only rivers of water but of air. It sees the crystals of the rock in rapid sympathetic motion, giving enthusiastic obedience to the sun's rays, then sinking back to the rest in the night. The whole world is in motion to the center. So also sounds. We hear only woodpeckers and squirrels and the rush of turbulent streams. But imagination gives us the sweet music of tiniest insect wings, enables us to hear all around the world the vibration of every needle, the waving of every bowl and branch, the sound of stars in circulation like particles in the blood." So today I want to bring you all along with me to discover the healing power of nature. When you develop a relationship with nature, even the little birds will come to you and say hello to you and be harmonious with your energy. Perhaps no one has inspired me as much as naturalist and Scotsman John Muir. In fact, when I go out in nature, I often take his books with me, and I'll read them under a tree or in a meadow, and I'm always moved by his words. John Muir once wrote, "I'd rather be in the mountains thinking about God than in church thinking about the mountains." I want to take you all back. The year is 1884, and a young Theodore Teddy Roosevelt, who would later become president, had just gone through a tremendous loss. On February 14th, 1884, he lost his wife and his mother on the same day to typhoid fever. On that day, he wrote in his journal, "The light has gone out of my life." Over the years, Theodore Teddy Roosevelt had fallen into a deep depression. He lost all interest in politics. That is, until he discovered the writings and articles of John Muir, who wrote about how generous nature is with her beauty, about why we should preserve the sequoia redwoods. So he contacted Muir, and in 1903, what happened next was very important. They went on a very famous camping trip. And out of that camping trip, they discovered the healing power of nature. Roosevelt was able to find God and let go of his grief and sorrow. Not only did he go on to become President of the United States of America, but he went to the Isthmus and built the Panama Canal. And because of John Muir's influence, we can thank him for national parks. That's why if you go into New York's Central Park, there's a statue of Theodore Teddy Roosevelt. It's because John Muir convinced him to build parks everywhere. And the trend took off into Canada, Europe, all over the world. I'd like to read you all a passageway here that comes from our national parks, 1901, page 56. Walk away quietly in any direction and taste the freedom of the mountaineer. Camp out among the grasses and gentians of glacial meadows, craggy garden nooks full of nature's darlings. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine flows into trees. The winds will blow their own freshness into you, and the storms their energy, while cares will drop off like autumn leaves. As age comes on, one source of enjoyment after another is closed, but nature's sources never fail. Now come along, let's go check out some more places. Remember, no matter what you're going through in life, there's nothing that can't be solved by taking a sacred walk in nature. Every time we spend time in a forest wilderness, we receive far more than we ever anticipated. We learn about this through the works of Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden, one of my favorite books. In fact, Thoreau once said, "I believe that there is a subtle magnetism in nature, which, if we consciously yield to it, will direct us all right." Now, this Walden Pond that he stayed at was actually on Ralph Waldo Emerson's property. And this book went on to be not only embraced by Emersonites in America, but by Gandhi as well. In nature, we find that there are various kingdoms, and this was taught to us by the Swiss-German-born toxicologist, occultist, astrologer, Philippus Areolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Heinum, otherwise known as Paracelsus. He looked at these kingdoms and he said, well, we have the sylphs, who are the rulers of the air. We have the salamanders, who are the rulers of the fire. We have the undines, or the mer people, who are the rulers of the water. And we have the gnomes and the dwarves, the rulers of the earth. These various intelligences, which are also known as the faerie kingdoms, or nature spirits, govern over certain areas and are attached to certain forms of intelligences. Now this correlates with what Thoreau and Emerson believed, that we all have an oversoul and that we're a compound creature. That humans being at the top of the hierarchy, we would have mental and emotional capacity, we'd have an individual soul. Now, animals are believed to share a universal soul, and by doing so, they have an emotional capacity, but don't have all the mental faculties. They work by intuition. And as we go into various kingdoms, we have the mineral kingdom and others that work off of necessity, and they can regenerate faster. Now, what's very interesting about this, as we look at how these rules work, they're all governed by natural laws, or universal law principles. What most don't realize is that everything in nature is alive. It all has a frequency. In fact, Mother Earth, or Gaia, has a frequency. She has chakras. She has a breathing atmosphere, pulsating veins throughout her streams and valleys and rivers and oceans. She has an entire frequency known as the Schumann resonance. And if you were to go into space, you'd have to emulate that resonance in order for you to feel normal, to feel at home. And because everything in nature has a resonance or a frequency to it, we know that's why you can sit under certain trees, and maybe you've heard the expression tree hugger before. There's something to that. Well, you can sit under certain trees and get an effect. In fact, that's what the early Native Americans did. They would realize that when you had a headache and you sat under a willow tree, that your headache would go away. That's how we discovered one of the constituents for aspirin, salicylic acid. And we go back and look at certain groups like the Druids, we see that they had a profound understanding of trees and magnetism and nature. They had an entire tree alphabet known as the Ogams, or Ohms. In fact, I got this necklace made recently in Ireland that has my name and Ogams, or Ohms. And they had this profound understanding of this property with the oak, ash, and thorn, or the magnetism that certain trees had in their properties. And some say this came from the ancient Phoenician Canaanites. When we were in Hollywood recently with Jordan Maxwell, he reminded me then, as he always does, that when you look up at the Hollywood sign, it's called that because to the ancient Druids, they would make their magic wands out of the wood of a holly tree. That's why we still say today, that's the magic of Hollywood. And there are no doubt all sorts of intelligences all around us, especially when we look in nature. We have a sort of communication system. Under the earth where we're walking right now, there's mycelium networks, which is sort of like nature's internet. We have all sorts of fungi. In fact, look at all the psychedelic or entheogenic plants and fungi. And entheogen comes from the Greek enthusiasmos, or entheos, meaning the God within, or to be inspired or inspirited. And then theos, which of course everyone knows. The most popular Greek name for men is Theo, which is a name for God, which is where we get theology, and theater, and gen for generate, generating the God experience within. And when we look at the practices of the indigenous peoples of South America, we learn about mysterious brew that they have that leads to spiritual experiences, known as ayahuasca. And with the help of a shaman, they've been able to transcend physical boundaries and open up into new realizations and shed personal beliefs and areas of the ego which are stored in the prefrontal cortex of the brain and open up into all kinds of new dimensions. And this is the power of nature. There are all sorts of different plants and herbs and trees and minerals that speak to us, that come alive, that communicate. Nature has a powerful language of its own. In fact, Buddhist monks have a very interesting practice. What they'll do is they'll take little pieces of grass, bark, herbs, roots, and they'll eat only little pieces of it and record how it made them feel. And after they meditate on that, they could go back later if they need to have that feeling or that energy signature, and they can bring it back into their body and they can tune into that frequency. And that's the incredible thing about nature, that it comes alive. When we look back throughout ancient history, we see that all the religions, secret societies, philosophies, and teachings are all based on nature. And we see this throughout ancient schools like the Eleusinian and Dionysian rites. We also find this in the Egyptian mythology with Horus or Ra and Osiris, or even in Mithraism and in the story of Samson in the Bible with the cutting of the locks or the coronas, which you see as the rays of light or the sun. When you look at the crown that the king or the queen wears, these are the coronas, like the Statue of Liberty, that represent the rays of the sun. To the ancient peoples, they would look at the sun in the sky, and they weren't necessarily sun worshippers, but they understood that it was representative of God, God's light, because Africa didn't own the sun, England didn't own the sun, Canada doesn't own the sun, America doesn't own the sun belongs to everyone. That's why when you look at the colors yellow, blue, red, and green, these are representative of all the secret societies on Earth. In fact, you find this in the Golden Dawn's Rosy Cross. You see this in the Eastern Star of Freemasonry. These are the prismatic colors of the light, the hidden colors of the sun. Of all of nature's kingdom, the sun is the ruler of the earth. But that's not all. If you look at all the beautiful Greco-Roman architecture across Europe, or in these old governmental buildings and old churches, you'll see that in their doorways, they have these three arches representing the triune nature of the triptych arch. This is based on the Trinity, or the solar Trinity, which comes from the morning sun, the midday sun, and the evening sun, or sunset. I also want you to take a look at Eastern philosophy and these teachings, which are all based on nature. Nothing captures this more beautifully than studying water. Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido, wrote in The Art of Peace, "If your opponent strikes with fire, Counter with water, becoming completely fluid and free-flowing. Water, by its nature, never collides with or breaks against anything. On the contrary, it swallows up any attack harmlessly. Bruce Lee once said, "Don't get set into one form. Adapt it and build your own, and let it grow. Be like water. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water." Now you put water in a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. In Lao Tzu's Tao, verse 8, he writes, "Your true path, like water, flows, dissolves, dances, falls, rises, is one with everything. Water is essential to life. It carries and supplies the essence, within life, all around." When we look around at nature, we see the perfect balance of these kingdoms. We see everything working in harmony. We see that there are universal laws and natural laws, and we must respect them. We cannot break these natural laws, and we must be in harmony with them. No matter how much we try to pretend they don't exist, no matter how much we try to pollute the planet and destroy all our natural resources, Mother Earth welcomes us on her planet, but we must heal the Earth, and we must be the great caretakers. Another author that's been absolutely life-changing to me has been the great Ted Andrews, who wrote Animal Speak. And if you were to look at my copy, you'll see that it's quite weathered from me bringing it out on very damp and rainy days. I'll sit down on a rock or under a tree some days, and I'll wait to see what animals come to greet me. And they all hold certain little personalities or a meaning to their animal totem. For example, Ted Andrews teaches that the raccoon has a personification of being curious and putting on masks for different people. Maybe the hawk teaches us to see things coming ahead that perhaps aren't in our regular line of vision. Or we learn from the little squirrels, which I absolutely love, to take information or to take things and bury them away for later so we can discover them and they'll pop up. But you know, when we look at the Native American traditions and shamans all over the world, we learn about the ideas of putting on masks, taking on the form of animals with shape-shifting and looking at their personalities, or the sacred idea of dance and dancing with nature and these archetypes. We even learn these sacred truths from insects, such as the butterfly, which shows us transformation. In fact, because these kingdoms share a universal spirit, you might kill an insect, but you'll never kill the life within it. Every time I come out into nature, I'm greeted by all the beautiful little creatures, whether it's the birds, like the chickadees, or the rabbits, the deer, the chipmunks, or even the spawning salmon. But perhaps no creature has caught my attention more than our great forest regenerators, all the beautiful varieties of squirrels we have here. In fact, I have many friends among the forest that come up to greet me, they call me, and they'll climb up my leg. They show me where the little leaf nests and their homes are in the trees. In fact, I have a friend around here, Little Red, who I often spend time with at all seasons, whether it's the winter time, the spring, the summer, the fall. She's just always so full of energy, it's so full of joy. And I also love our gray squirrels. In fact, scientific studies have shown us by researchers at the University of Wilkes, Princeton, and Purdue in the Goheen and Swihart studies in 2003 that the unrivaled leaders in seed dispersion and subsequently in forest regeneration are gray squirrels. But I want to talk to you all today about why we need to respect and preserve the eastern gray squirrel. In fact, I have a friend named Peter Matthews that has a wonderful website called i/csrs.com, or the Interactive Center for Scientific Research about Squirrels, where you can learn all about the great work that the eastern gray squirrel does in our forests. I want to take this time out to draw everyone's attention to this insane call on the gray squirrel over in the UK, where it's believed that it's wiping out the red squirrel. Of course, that we know because of climate change, the gray squirrel, which also helps with biodiversity by planting seeds and nuts and forgetting where they put it, and then great forests and trees pop up, it's more versatile in its diet. In this climate change that we're in, more so than the red squirrel. But we have this idea that because the eastern gray squirrel, which was brought in as a status symbol because everybody had to have one because they were just so darn cute, now people want to get rid of it. And we have the same insane logic in British Columbia, Canada, where it's thought because the gray squirrel is an invasive species that it's less important or less valuable than the native Douglas red squirrel. But again, at one point, the White House had its own eastern gray squirrel, Pete the Squirrel. So I think as humans, we really have to learn to get along with all of nature and find a better way to integrate ourselves alongside it. I want to share with you all a passageway, again, from the great John Muir, and this time I'm reading from My First Summer in the Sierra. I like to watch the squirrels. There are two species here, the large California gray and the Douglas. The latter is the brightest of all the squirrels I've ever seen, a hot spark of life, making every tree tingle with his prickly toes, a condensed nugget of fresh mountain vigor and valor, as free from disease as a sunbeam. One cannot think of such an animal ever being weary or sick. He seems to think the mountains belong to him, and at first tried to drive away the whole flock of sheep, as well as the shepherd and dogs. How he scolds and what faces he makes, all eyes, teeth, and whiskers, if not so comically small. He would indeed be a dreadful fellow. I should like to know more about his bringing up, his life in the home not whole, as well as in the treetops throughout all seasons. Strange that I have not yet found a nest full of young ones. The Douglas is nearly allied to the red squirrel of the Atlantic slope, and may have been distributed to this side of the continent by way of the great unbroken forests of the north. The California gray is one of the most beautiful, and next to the Douglas, the most interesting of our hairy neighbors. Compared with the Douglas, he's twice as large, but far less lively and influential as a worker in the woods, and he manages to make his way through leaves and branches with less stir than his small brother. I've never heard him bark at anything except our dogs. When in search of food, he glides silently from branch to branch, examining last year's cones to see whether some few seeds may not be left between the scales, or gleans fallen ones among the leaves on the ground, since none of the present season's crops is yet available. His tail floats now behind him, now above him, level or gracefully curled like a wisp of cirrus cloud, every hair in its place, clean and shining and radiant as thistled down in spite of rough, gummy work. His whole body seems about as unsubstantial as his little tail. The little Douglas is fiery, peppery, full of brag, and fight and show with movements so quick and keen they almost sting the onlooker, and the harlequin gyrating show he makes of himself turns one giddy to see. The gray is shy and oftentimes stealthy in his movements, as if half expecting an enemy in every tree and bush, at back of every log, wishing only to be let alone apparently, and manifesting no desire to be seen or admired or feared.
You can hear those bells, you know, he's flying. That's right now. Yeah, why not? If you like a little hop there. So while we're flying in the woods here, you know, you can, if he allows us to, we can try and set up some interesting flights. So, you know, make it a bit tricky for him, you know, make it a bit more difficult, kind of challenge his agility a little bit. You know?
All right. So should I send him flying?
Yeah, give him a little push.
Yeah, just take that forward.
That's it. That was excellent. You see how he just tucks his wings in? I don't know if you caught it. Just before he came over the top, he just closed his wings to drop that huge height.
So now to fly him this way, then I have to turn this way and
Exactly.
step
You want
forward?
to face down the path. That's it.
Okay.
Now take one big step.
Oh, I didn't have to step.
Yeah. See, you won't need much encouragement. Yeah, he's ready to fly. So let's call him out one more time.
Whoa. He flew right by me.
He went in a huge circle around the way. So he's able to turn these really tight corners, you know?
He is. He's amazing.
And this is that huge tail and the short wings really coming into their own, you know?
He's amazing.
Come on, look at what she has in her glove.
Allen Ginsberg once wrote, "Angel-headed hipsters, burning for the ancient heavenly connection to the starry dynamo in the machinery of the night. So remember, there's no problem too big that you can't solve by spending time in nature. And no matter where you are in the world, you can enter the universe through a forest wilderness. Until next time, remember to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends, and I'll meet you all at that place behind closed eyelids.